on the organization. I can't tell you exactly how it needs to be organized, but I can tell you it needs to be somewhat simple and quite explicit. People need to be able to understand it. We've seen a lot of models where you have a coordinating secretariat, that's given a mandate, and then different type of working groups that are working towards achieving a goal. And sometimes you have technical committees or underneath that are helping churn out specific actions. That's often the way it happens. That doesn't mean that it needs to happen like this with you. Here are a few important things to consider when you do this. Where is the hosts? Is there kind of a high sponsor from the government perspective, and what are the pros and cons to do it at the or should we set up a completely new and independent institutions? Everything's possible. Every time you have pros and cons. And so, again, you can read about all this in the documentations that we have, for instance, the Public-Private Dialogue Handbook that details all those different options for you. But this is important to consider, because these are the situations that we found on the ground in a number of countries. I was telling you before about the ICT sector in Belarus. This is one of the things we found where you had many people with policy-making power, many people with regulatory power, and nobody understood how the system worked. Because you had different ministries, different working group, the operator, the regulator, a national program, a council, a secretariat for information communication technology, another working group for communication, and everybody had regulatory power, everybody had decision-making power, and it's unclear who's making decision. At the end of the day, nothing gets done. Or people are very unhappy about what gets done. And the SMEs don't benefit at the end. So you need to do something that's slightly more streamlined. Here is another example of a country in Africa, Benin, Francophone country, where we found so many different groups doing so many different things. On the left sides are the purely public sector entities. On the right side, the private sector entities. And in the middle, a number of mechanisms that they had set up to discuss and where were those working groups. And this is what we found. This is those arrows are actually real arrows of communication and who talks to whom and how. And so you can imagine that it's very complicated situation to have a clear view of the organization as to how do we talk about infrastructure? How do we talk about the ports? How do we talk about the cotton industry? And who talk to whom? And if you add on top of that some large multinational programs of financing, World Bank loans or Millennium Challenge accounts or European Union trade programs, these have all their own requirements and their own set of actors as well. It creates large situations. It's difficult. Doesn't mean that it's not impossible, but this is often what we find. And so a simple and explicit organization for dialogue sometimes might simplify things, and you might actually grow the quality of the discussion. This is in Malaysia, where you see already something a little bit more organized, with a special task force to facilitate business. The initials in Malaysian is PEMUDA. I hope I pronounce it right, where they got 3 working groups, and under each of those working groups, they have a number of task force. This is already a bit easier to understand. And this is another system. I told you earlier about those Presidential Advisory Council or Presidential Investors Council. Here's a system which is simple. It's not a system that I particularly love because I don't think it's very, very representative, but it works sometimes. You have a president or you have a person of, good stature who can take the decision, and you have a number of investors, and you're going to have different type of investors. In that particular case, this is an actual case where you had 18 investors, and in those 18 investors, I think this was in Tanzania a while back, maybe 2005 or so, you had 6 investors that were local and invested in the country. You had 6 foreign investors that were invested in the country, and you also had 6 foreign investors that were not invested in the country. And they were sitting around the one table and giving advice to the president of the country on what policies is to happen. It's a very simple and explicit organization with a permanent secretariat. If the job is done well and if those investors are representative of a larger group, it can work. But in that particular case, you see that 2/3 of the investors are foreign, and for only 1/3 is actually local. And so you have here issues as to representativity. But you can have a permanent secretariat that supports this, and then an implementation work group that does administrative coordination with technicians, reporting to the head of that secretariat. Here is an example in Tajikistan with the Regional Consultative Council to improve the business environment and investment climate in the Heartland region. And it was focused on agriculture, if I remember correctly, with 1 secretariat of the Regional Consultative Council and 3 working groups. One of them on farmer households, water security and water supply services. One which was more on a regulatory issue around tax. And one that was more about harvesting, processing of agricultural products and what are the regulations around that. And so you see on the right side the decision-making level, the coordination, the level of analysis that can be done, and a series of ad hoc roundtables to complement the system depending on the topics. Here is a system in the Jordan Valley. I talked to you earlier about this Jordan Valley Water Forum, where you have 5 issues that are related to water and agriculture, and issues of task transfer between the bulk water provider and the retail water provider, issues of water management and operation, issues of adaptation to climate change, issues of agricultural skills, technology and innovation, and so on and so forth. So hundreds of issues are there, but they are filtered by working groups that are actually regional committees. So they have regional and geographical competencies. Because when you're talking with water and agriculture, often you have different regions, have different type of crop patterns, different type of yields, different type of means to do things. And in that case, it was good to have different committees, the North, the Middle Valley, the South Valley. And then there is a steering group, and the steering group has 4 public members and 4 private sector or farmers members, and they're representative of the water usage associations, and they have elections every year, and they elect the head of that will represent the farmers in the committee. And then every 6 months they do a big forum. So this is another way. As you've seen, I showed you many different ways to do things. I'll tell you another one. I don't have the slide here to do it, but it's I think also in Malaysia. I forgot exactly, so excuse me if it's not the right country, where they do actually round tables. And they do large round tables. For 3 days, they bring in a lot of people from the private sector, not just representative of associations, but like 500 or 1,000 people coming in a huge stadium, and they speak for 3 days in 2 commissions, and it's more like this kind of Davos forum, but just for one country. And people talk with each other, and they get to some resolution of issues. And so this is another system, much less formalized, much less like permanent, where there is some institutions working day in, day out. It's more like you have this from time to time, you bring everybody in. So there is multiple ways to do this thing. And we can't tell you there is one way. And if someone tells you there is one way, send them to us or tell them they're wrong, because it's not true. Many ways to do this, many ways to bake a cake.